By the mid-19th century, the Ottoman Empire found itself increasingly entangled in a web of financial dependency that would reshape its political independence and economic sovereignty. What began as short-term borrowing to manage military and administrative crises gradually evolved into a system in which European powers exercised decisive influence over Ottoman finances. Debt became more than an economic burden. It became a political instrument that weakened the empire from within and accelerated its decline. The Ottoman state entered the modern era facing mounting challenges. Continuous warfare, outdated military structures, declining agricultural productivity, and administrative inefficiency placed enormous strain on the treasury. As European states industrialized and expanded their economies, the Ottomans struggled to compete in global markets. Tax revenues failed to meet growing expenditures, and traditional sources of income no longer sustained imperial needs. In response, the government turned increasingly to foreign loans as a means of survival. The first major foreign loan was taken in the 1850s during the Crimean War. European creditors, particularly from Britain and France, presented borrowing as a necessary step toward modernization and military security. While these loans provided immediate relief, they carried high interest rates and unfavorable conditions. Much of the borrowed money never reached productive sectors of the economy, instead being consumed by military costs, palace expenditures, and debt repayments. As borrowing continued, the Ottoman Empire entered a cycle of dependency. New loans were often used to pay interest on older ones, deepening financial vulnerability. European banks and investors gained leverage, using debt obligations to demand greater control over fiscal policy. By the 1870s, the empire's financial situation had deteriorated to the point where default became inevitable. In 1875, the Ottoman government declared that it could no longer meet its debt payments. This announcement shocked European financial markets and triggered direct intervention by creditor nations. What followed was not merely a financial restructuring, but a significant erosion of Ottoman sovereignty. European powers insisted on mechanisms to guarantee repayment, laying the foundation for foreign supervision of Ottoman finances. Central to this process was the growing influence of European-controlled financial institutions, particularly the Ottoman Bank. Although nominally an Ottoman institution, the bank was dominated by British and French interests. It functioned as the empire's central bank, controlling currency issuance, managing state revenues, and facilitating foreign loans. Through the Ottoman Bank, European powers gained direct access to the empire's economic lifelines. The most decisive blow came in 1881 with the establishment of the Ottoman Public Debt Administration. This institution, staffed largely by European officials, was granted authority over key revenue sources, including customs duties, salt taxes, tobacco monopolies, and stamp revenues. These income streams were diverted directly to debt repayment, bypassing the Ottoman treasury entirely. While the administration stabilized repayments, it severely restricted the government's ability to manage its own finances. The presence of foreign officials overseeing Ottoman revenues symbolized the empire's loss of economic independence. Decisions about taxation, spending, and investment increasingly reflected European interests rather than domestic priorities. Infrastructure projects such as railways and ports were often designed to benefit European trade routes, facilitating the extraction of raw materials while limiting the development of local industry. European influence extended beyond finance into politics and diplomacy. Debt gave creditor nations leverage in negotiations over territorial disputes, reforms, and administrative policies. Economic pressure was frequently combined with diplomatic threats, forcing the Ottoman government to accept conditions that weakened central authority. Financial dependency thus translated into political vulnerability. Trade policies further reinforced European dominance. Capitulations, originally intended to encourage commerce, granted European merchants favorable tax rates and legal protections. Over time, these privileges undermined local producers and reduced state revenue. Ottoman markets were flooded with cheaper European manufactured goods, while domestic industries struggled to survive. The empire became increasingly dependent on exporting raw materials and importing finished products, reinforcing economic imbalance. Attempts at reform failed to reverse the trend. While the Tanzimat era introduced new administrative structures and legal reforms, it did not address the underlying issue of financial autonomy. Modernization efforts required funding, which often meant further borrowing. Each reform initiative, though well-intentioned, deepened reliance on foreign capital. Ottoman leaders were acutely aware of the dangers posed by debt, yet alternatives were limited. Raising taxes risked unrest, while reducing military spending threatened security. Industrialization required capital the empire did not possess. European lenders, aware of this dilemma, dictated terms that favored their strategic and economic interests. By the late 19th century, financial dependency had reshaped the empire's social and political landscape. Public resentment grew as foreign control became more visible. Intellectuals, bureaucrats, and military officers increasingly viewed debt as a symbol of national humiliation. Economic weakness fueled nationalist movements and reformist ideologies, particularly among younger generations seeking independence from both imperial stagnation and foreign domination. The burden of debt also limited the empire's ability to respond to crises. During periods of famine, rebellion, or war, resources were constrained by repayment obligations. Revenue that could have been used for social services or development flowed instead to European creditors. Economic policy became reactive rather than strategic, focused on survival rather than growth. European influence over Ottoman finances reached its peak just as global power dynamics shifted in the early 20th century. While creditor nations secured short-term gains, the long-term instability of the empire threatened regional balance. Financial control could not compensate for political decay, social unrest, and rising nationalist demands. When the Ottoman Empire entered the First World War, it did so burdened by decades of debt and economic weakness. Although the public debt administration continued to operate, the war disrupted financial arrangements and exposed the limits of foreign control. The empire's eventual collapse revealed how deeply financial dependency had undermined its foundations. In retrospect, debt was not merely a consequence of Ottoman decline, but a driving force behind it. European exploitation of financial vulnerability transformed economic weakness into political subordination. Control over banks, revenues, and trade eroded sovereignty long before territorial losses were finalized. The legacy of this period serves as a reminder that economic independence is inseparable from political power. The Ottoman Empire's experience illustrates how debt, when combined with external influence, can hollow out a state from within. What appeared as financial assistance became a mechanism of control, shaping the fate of one of history's longest-lasting empires and marking the final stages of its struggle to remain independent in a rapidly changing world.